Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. I am your host, Lorrie Brook, and together we will get to take a look at what goes on behind closed doors. Today, I'm joined by Angie Grandt.
Hi, my name is Angie Grandt, and I am here to talk about the adoptive parent and adopted child relationship.
Angie is an adoptive and bio mum, former foster mum, adoption coach, speech therapist, and has worked in the autism field for 2+ decades. She knows that raising children who are difficult to connect with and who often display challenging behaviours takes a huge toll on parents. This can often lead to shame, anxiety, depression, isolation, and growing loss of hope. This doesn't have to be the story, and Angie coaches adoptive parents through worry, frustration, and resentment to create hope and joy through lasting connections. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Relationship Talks. I'm here with Angie Grandt, and we're going to be talking about the relationship between adoptive child and adoptive parent. But can I ask first, Angie, before we get there, thank you so much for joining me. How did you actually get here, though? What's your story behind all of this?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. A little bit about my story, and excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, but a little bit about my story is that professionally, I have worked in the autism field for a couple of decades. I'm also a speech and language pathologist and have worked in early intervention, so working with families from right when their child is born up until their 3rd birthday. But then personally, I am a biological mom. My biological daughter is 21, and I'm also a grandma, thanks to her. And in addition to that, I also have a 17-year-old adopted son. And he joined our family when he was 5. It was unexpected, which I don't think is the normal adoption path, but I can talk a little bit more about that if it comes up. But in parenting him, I felt like I was so prepared, right? Like I had all this experience with autism and working with families, and I felt really prepared. I dove into learning about trauma and attachment, knowing that I was bringing him into our family. And I was doing all of the right things according to the experts, according to all of the kind of specialists in his life. I was doing all the right things, and our relationship kept getting harder and harder. And as a mom who I brought him into my family to love him and provide him a home, and my connection with him just kept getting harder and harder to the point that I had really awful feelings like frustration and resent and anger and sadness and all the things that you don't want to have as a mom, right? I just wanted to love him, and it was so hard. And so fast forward then several years, I fell into mindset coaching kind of for business related reasons. Actually, while things were really tricky with my son, I kept thinking like, man, I need to write a book about this. The things we experience in our home and the feelings that I'm having as a mom are just wild, right? My friends didn't understand. They tried to, but it wasn't their experience with their biological kids. And so I kept thinking like, man, I should write a book. That's not in the cards for me right now. I don't see myself doing that in the next year or so. But I didn't know what else to do. Like I knew what I was experiencing was for a reason. So then, like I said, fast forward a couple of years and I fell into mindset coaching for business related reasons. And as soon as I was inside that program and becoming a certified coach myself, I just had this, oh my gosh, this is what I was missing when I was, when things were so hard with behaviors. I was doing all the things, but I didn't know how to keep my head in the game. I didn't know how to show up as the mom who just loves him unconditionally. I didn't have the right tools to do that because I was being told what to do, was doing that, but I didn't know how to be. So that is what led me to wanting to help other parents do it better than I did and to have the tools to show up so that they really can connect and not focus so much on the behaviors, not focus so much on how they're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, and really take control of their feelings and not feel victim to what they think is happening.
Can I ask, when you were going through that hard period, what was it like with other family members in the household? Were they able to have that close connection? Was that something that was evident, or was everyone struggling?
Everybody was struggling, quite honestly. And from shortly after we adopted, then the tension in the home and the difficulties with relationships led to a divorce. There were other factors, of course, that added just frustration made that part really hard. And then I have this great guy in my life. He's been here for, I don't know, 9 years now. And same thing, like that frustration, that overwhelm just took over him too. And my biological daughter, she didn't know how to connect either. And I think I now know I needed to go first. I needed to show them how to show up differently, but I didn't know that then. And I didn't have the tools that I have now.
Yep. And so what is the relationship like now?
That is still a work in progress. He's at a challenging age right now, and he does primarily live with his dad, so my ex-spouse. So I know in the future we'll work on it. Right now just isn't the right time, but I know that I'm in a different place now than I was several years ago when he was younger, and it was so hard because then I don't know a better word than victim, but I felt so victim, like these things are happening in my home and our life. And I just felt like I'm supposed to feel frustrated and overwhelmed, and that's supposed to consume me. That's what I thought. And now I know, okay, yeah, feel frustrated for a minute and then figure out how you want to feel, how you want to think about it, and take control so that you can keep showing him that you love him the way that you really do. But I didn't know that then. And nobody else in my life did either.
And so tell me about the families that you work with. How do you support them to create this connection?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the families that I work with now, I work with families in a couple of different capacities through coaching. I offer some trainings in a community that I've created for adoptive parents. And then also in my everyday job, like I said, I work with families of children with autism and early intervention families. And so in all of those capacities, I'm really taking these tools that I've learned to help shift the way that parents are thinking, because it's so easy to get caught up in the behaviors, and then that can be really all consuming and really, all consuming. I don't have a better way to describe it, right? Like it can dictate how you think about grocery shopping or vacationing or spending time with friends or even family. And so I'm taking the tools that I have to really help shift that thinking of, okay, so this behavior happened, but how do you want to show up for your child? How do you want to do things differently? How do you want to feel about, okay, so X, Y, or Z happened, but does that mean that it has to ruin the rest of your day and the rest of their day? Let's shift this. That's really what I've been helping parents with, and really helping them with some key tools to focus on building connections. That's something too that in the past couple of years, like there's been a pandemic. It's really impacted the way that people are connecting and interacting with each other. And so that's been a big area of focus for me too, is just let's remember that we love our kids and we enjoy them and we want to spend time with them, and don't get so hung up in all the things.
I think the pandemic put an added layer of time in terms of we're spending so much time together, and we didn't know how to handle that. And then having to add all those extra duties that we then had to do as families, whether it be homeschooling or working from home or whatever the case may be. But when you're looking at creating these connections just on a day-to-day basis, and there is something that happens and we are getting frustrated and we are getting cranky that the other person doesn't seem to be listening to us, and why can't they just do what they're told? All of that. How do you actually stop and change that mindset? Because it is all consuming. You are sitting there going, I asked you to clean your bedroom, or I asked you to do this, and you're not listening to me.
Yeah, so that is such a great question. I think it takes some pre-work. I know working with parents, it takes some pre-work, right? You can't just decide, okay, moving forward, every time my child does X, Y, or Z, I'm going to show up in a different way. Because you really have to plan what that's going to look like and have some tools in your invisible or visible tool belt with you at all times. And one of the strategies that I work with parents on, for example, is to pick the first problem that they want to work on. Maybe it's that they feel like their child doesn't listen to them. And so the parent gets stuck in this loop of I ask them, and then I ask them, and then I ask them in their mom voice or dad voice. And when they're frustrated with themselves, right? Because they don't want to yell at their kids. They don't want to have that interaction. They also want to get things done. And so I work with families to pick the problem. Maybe it's getting into physical altercations with their siblings. Maybe it's that not listening, whatever it is. So pick that thing and then write down, how are you currently responding? So what do you do if you ask them to pick up their room? Just write it out. Be really honest with yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just be honest. And then even do that on a piece of paper, right? Write down not only what the behavior is, but then also how are you thinking about it? What are the thoughts that are going through your head? So if it's about picking up, maybe your thoughts are like, he needs to listen to me. I'm in charge. I'm the parent. He never listens to me. Why doesn't he listen to me the first time? Right? We all have these thoughts swirling through our heads. Whether or not you consciously think about them, if you take a minute and get quiet with yourself and ask yourself, what am I really thinking when that happens? Because your response is probably very quick and reactive, right? But to find some quiet time, maybe before the family gets up, and really to write this out. What am I thinking? And then how do I feel? And same thing, like sometimes we might not know how we feel, but when we take time and just keep asking ourselves, like, how do I really feel when that happens? You might actually feel a physical sensation in your body. You might feel your shoulders tense up, or you might feel the knot in your stomach, or your head might get hot. We all have different reactions. And then to write down how you're responding, which probably isn't the way you want to. And then draw a line right down the middle of the paper. And on the right-hand side, write that same thing, right? My child isn't listening to me. And write down, how do you want to think about your child? Maybe you want to think, maybe I didn't ask them in a way that they understand me. How could I do it differently? Or maybe instead you want to think, this is a great time for me to get on the floor and connect with them, right? I asked them to pick up their toys and I could sit on the couch and bark at them and get louder and louder. Or I could say, you know what? I've been really working on building a connection. Why don't I get on the floor and make a game out of it? Wouldn't that be a great thing to think instead of, oh my gosh, they're not listening to me? So to just list all of the things you could think or that you want to think. And then also to list out, how do you want to feel? How do you want to feel when you ask your child to clean up the room? And even if you're on the floor doing it with them, how do you want to feel about that interaction, right? I want to feel like I'm connecting with them. I want to feel we're doing this together. I want to feel like it's not this, you listen to me and I tell you what to do. That's not how I want to parent. And your parenting style might be different. And then write down, how are you going to respond? Instead of your reactive, raising your voice or whatever it might have been, how do you want to respond instead? And that's where your question comes in, right? Like, how do you then do that? So with every parent, it's a little different. For some of us, it's creating a mantra. If you're focusing on the raising your voice, maybe create a mantra of, if it's about when they're not listening, I'm going to be curious about how I could help it go better. I'm going to be curious about how I could help it go better. I'm going to be curious about how, just keep repeating it. It might sound silly to you, but when they're not listening to you and you're repeating this mantra to yourself, it's really hard to get mad if you're like, I'm going to be curious, because when you're curious, you're not yelling at your kids. So it might be a mantra. With some families, I've even said, hang sticky notes around the house in every room that this thing comes up, because sometimes it's really hard to remember in the moment what you really wanted to do. So hanging up sticky notes, or even being even more permanent than that, and getting something framed about whatever that mantra is that you want to say, so that you really can show up differently. But it does take a lot of pre-work ahead of time.
Yeah, it does. And it would be work that you have to put in without actually seeing that benefit right then and there. You've got to be committed to the actual process. Does it take effort from the child too? Like when we're talking about an adoptive child, is there tension if they don't want that connection?
Here are my thoughts about relationships in general, whether we're talking about an adoptive kiddo or your spouse or whatever. The other person really never has to change, right? With my guy, and I keep getting frustrated at him because he's not doing the dishes or he's not doing blah, 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 whatever it is. He actually doesn't have to start doing those things for me to show up in a different way. I really just have to work on me and how I'm thinking and feeling and showing up for him. And it's the same with our kids. So I don't need my son to do anything different. I just need to keep working on my mindset and how I show up for him. And the same rings true for all parents, other adoptive parents, even when your child is pushing back at you, right? Because that is something that's so common with adoptive kiddos, is to resist that connection which is so hard as a parent. But you can take that as a parent as a rejection, or to just keep shifting your thinking, like he's doing the best that he can with the way that his brain has been wired, and I'm going to show up and love him unconditionally anyways. He doesn't have to change at all. However, I know that by continuing to keep true to showing up as that mom, chances of him learning to connect in a stronger way is so much stronger than if we keep yelling.
Yep. Yep. And that's just, as soon as you say that, it's like a weight, I think, being lifted off your shoulders, because often we are in that position where we want things to be different, but we sit there and we tell ourselves, but they'll never change. They won't do that. They won't do the work. They won't come to therapy. They won't go to counseling. They won't do the mindset work. And so you end up in that loop of thinking that can't happen.
Yeah. Instead of just loving our kids for exactly who they are, right?
So tell me, what's your secret to happy, healthy relationships?
I would say my secret to happy, healthy relationships is that full, like really, truly understanding that we can't change anybody else. Kids are going to be kids. Other adults are going to be adults. If we want true happiness in relationships, it really is up to us to work on our own mindset and to not ever put that pressure on anybody else that they need to change. Because whether it is about an adopted child that we made a decision to bring into our home, or a significant other, or a biological child, or your boss, like you're there by choice. And really our role is just to love other people unconditionally, no matter what.
Bring an adoptive child home for that first time. How do you go at starting to build that relationship?
That's an interesting question. I think when you adopt a child, it could be a brand new baby fresh out of the womb, all the way up through close to young adulthood, right? And anywhere in between. And so I think no matter the age of the child or what they've experienced, I think to start building that connection, it really takes curiosity and learning about them and learning how to love them unconditionally, no matter what they bring to the table. And really, I don't want to say like getting rid of your expectations, but I think we all innately have expectations of other humans, whether it's the barista at the coffee shop or our spouse or whatever, right? We expect people to behave in a certain way. And when they don't behave how we expect, then we get frustrated. But the same rings true for an adoptive kiddo that we bring into our family, right? They are their own unique human who has already, just the pure fact that they've been removed from their biological initial bond, whatever that looks like, that in and of itself can be really traumatic for many individuals. And so going into it knowing that they're a unique human, and to get rid of your expectations of how they should behave or how they should love you back or what that should look like, and just going into it with this thought that I'm going to be curious about who they really are and how I can foster their development and how I can love them unconditionally.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us today, Angie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think every message that you've shared today relates to all types of relationships. And you pointed that out yourself. It doesn't matter what type of relationship we're talking about here, but showing up and being the person you want to be in that relationship makes all the difference.
Yeah, my passion really is for helping adoptive parents, because I know, oh man, as moms, we're so hard on ourselves. And then when you make that choice to adopt a child and bring them into your home, and you have this thought, I'm bringing this child who's already been through something into my home, I'm going to give them the best home I can. And when that relationship is hard, it's hard to not beat yourself up about it. And so I really am so determined to help other adoptive parents to have the tools to help them show up in the way that their kiddo needs them to.
That's beautiful. I will make sure all of your contact details go in the show notes. So if anyone wants to reach out, by all means do so, because it is a relationship that it doesn't need to be difficult if you can approach it in the right way.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's okay.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Angie. Bye.
Bye.
And thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Relationship Talks. If you can, I'd love for you to jump on and leave a review. And whilst you are at it, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please join me again next week when we get to take a look behind closed doors at someone else's relationship. But until then, I am your host, Lorrie Brook, and remember the choice is yours, so make today and the week the very best it can be.